You are about to descend into a world you were never meant to see. A world where power hides in plain sight, and history is not merely written, but forged by the hands of ruthless men. This is not a story for the faint of heart, nor for those who cling to comfortable illusions. This is the truth, raw and unyielding, that will carve itself into your very soul. On a frigid December morning in 1887, the most powerful man in Pittsburgh made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Steel magnate Cornelius Vandermark descended the marble staircase of his Fifth Avenue mansion to find his wife's emerald evening gown laid out perfectly on the Persian rug of their grand foyer, still warm to the touch, as if she had just stepped out of it moments before. But Evangeline Vandermark was nowhere to be found. The front door remained locked from the inside, every window sealed against the bitter Pennsylvania winter, and not a single servant had seen or heard anything unusual during the night. What made this disappearance even more chilling was that Evangeline had been seen by 3 different household staff members going to bed just 4 hours earlier, wearing that very same gown. The Pittsburgh Police Department, pressured by Vandermark's political connections, officially closed the case after only 6 days, citing insufficient evidence of foul play. But the truth about what happened to Evangeline Vandermark that December night was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined, involving a web of industrial espionage, family secrets, and a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Pittsburgh's gilded society. What investigators never discovered was that Evangeline's disappearance was merely the final act in a drama that had been unfolding for over 2 years. A deadly game of cat and mouse between a woman seeking justice for her murdered father and a husband whose empire was built on the bones of his enemies. The winter of 1887 found Pittsburgh at the height of its industrial glory, a city where fortunes were made in steel and coal, and where the smokestacks of countless factories painted the sky in perpetual shades of gray. The air itself seemed to carry the weight of ambition and desperation, thick with coal smoke and the dreams of thousands of immigrants who had come to America seeking their fortune in the blazing furnaces of Pennsylvania's mills. It was a city of stark contradictions, where magnificent mansions stood just blocks away from squalid tenements, and where a man could rise from poverty to unimaginable wealth, or fall from grace into an unmarked grave in a matter of months. The Vandermark mansion stood as a testament to this new American aristocracy, a 4-story Gothic Revival masterpiece that dominated an entire city block on Fifth Avenue, its towers and turrets casting long shadows over the Allegheny River below. The building itself was a monument to excess, featuring hand-carved stone gargoyles imported from French quarries, stained glass windows depicting scenes from industrial triumph, and a grand ballroom that could accommodate 300 of Pittsburgh's elite. The mansion's grounds sprawled across 4 acres of meticulously maintained gardens, greenhouse conservatories, and outbuildings that included a carriage house large enough for a dozen vehicles, servants' quarters that housed the estate's substantial staff, and the mysterious ice house that would later play such a crucial role in the dark events to come. Cornelius Vandermark had built his empire from nothing. Starting as a common laborer in the steel mills before revolutionizing the production process with innovations that made him one of the wealthiest men in America. At 52, he was an imposing figure with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through anyone who dared cross him in business. His hands, though now soft from years of prosperity, still bore the calluses and scars of his early days working the furnaces, a reminder of the brutal world he had clawed his way out of through a combination of brilliant engineering insight and utterly ruthless business practices. Those who knew him in his early days often remarked on the transformation from the idealistic young inventor who had genuinely believed his innovations could improve working conditions for all steel workers, to the cold industrial titan who would later orchestrate the deaths of anyone who threatened his empire. Cornelius's rise to power had not been achieved through innovation alone. In the cutthroat world of 1880s industrial America, success often required a willingness to employ methods that would make even the most hardened robber baron pause. Vandermark had learned early that competitors could be eliminated through means far more permanent than simple market competition. A strategic fire here, a boiler explosion there, the mysterious disappearance of a rival's key engineer, these were the tools of industrial warfare in an age where government oversight was minimal and law enforcement could be bought for the price of a politician's campaign fund. His marriage to Evangeline Hartwell in 1882 had been the social event of the decade. She, the daughter of a prominent Boston banking family, 20 years his junior, with auburn hair that caught the light like spun copper and a laugh that could fill an entire ballroom. At 25, Evangeline possessed the kind of refined beauty and sophisticated education that marked her as a member of New England's old money aristocracy. She spoke fluent French and German, played piano with near-professional skill, and had received the finest education available to women of her social class at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut. But beneath her polished exterior lay a sharp intelligence and moral compass that would ultimately put her on a collision course with her husband's criminal empire. The wedding had been a calculated move on Cornelius's part, designed to provide his industrial empire with the social legitimacy that only an alliance with Boston's banking elite could offer. The Hartwell family's connections opened doors throughout New England's financial community, allowing Vandermark to secure the massive loans necessary to expand his steel production and acquire smaller competitors. For her part, Evangeline had entered the marriage believing she was aligning herself with a man whose innovations could genuinely improve the lives of American workers, unaware that her new husband viewed human life as just another resource to be exploited in pursuit of profit. But by the winter of 1887, those who knew the couple intimately whispered that all was not well in the Vandermark household. Evangeline, once the sparkling centerpiece of Pittsburgh's social scene, had grown increasingly withdrawn over the past year. She spent hours alone in the mansion's extensive library, writing in a leather-bound journal that she kept locked in her personal writing desk with a small brass key that she wore on a chain around her neck. The library itself was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves containing over 3,000 volumes, including first editions of literary classics, scientific treatises, and an extensive collection of books on American industrial history that Evangeline had been accumulating since her arrival in Pittsburgh. The household staff, a carefully selected group of 12 individuals who had served the family for years, noticed that she had begun taking long walks at odd hours, often returning with muddy boots and a distant look in her green eyes. These walks frequently took her through Pittsburgh's working-class neighborhoods, where she would speak with the wives and children of mill workers, learning firsthand about the dangerous conditions and frequent accidents that plagued the city's industrial workforce. What the servants didn't know was that these conversations were part of Evangeline's growing investigation into the suspicious patterns of industrial accidents that seemed to follow in her husband's wake wherever his business interests led him. She was digging, relentlessly, into the shadows of his empire, unearthing truths that could shatter everything he had built. The Vandermark estate employed some of Pittsburgh's most trusted servants, each chosen not only for their skills, but for their discretion and absolute loyalty to the family. Margaret Sullivan, the Irish head housekeeper, had overseen the mansion's daily operations for nearly a decade after immigrating from County Cork during the devastating potato famine of the 1870s. She was a woman of fierce intelligence and unshakable moral principles, qualities that had made her invaluable to the Vandermark household, but would also make her a crucial witness to the strange events surrounding Evangeline's disappearance. Thomas Brennan, the gruff Scottish groundskeeper, had arrived in America with his wife and 3 children in 1868, fleeing the economic devastation that followed the Highland clearances. His family had worked for wealthy Americans since their arrival, and Thomas took immense pride in maintaining the Vandermark estate's grounds to perfection. But his keen eye for detail and intimate knowledge of every inch of the property would reveal disturbing signs that someone had been using the estate for purposes far darker than anyone imagined. Charles Henley served as the mansion's butler, a position that required him to be present for all of the family's social functions and privy to many of their private conversations. Originally from Philadelphia, Henley had been trained in the finest traditions of English domestic service and prided himself on maintaining the highest standards of professional discretion. But even his carefully cultivated neutrality would be tested by the increasingly bizarre and frightening events that surrounded Evangeline's final months in the mansion. Dr. Franklin Westbrook had served as the Vandermark family physician for over 5 years, making regular visits to the mansion to attend to both Cornelius and Evangeline's health needs. A graduate of Harvard Medical School and a respected member of Pittsburgh's professional community, Dr. Westbrook had begun to notice troubling changes in Evangeline's behavior and physical condition during the months leading up to her disappearance. His private medical notes, which would later be discovered by investigators, revealed his growing concern about what he euphemistically described as marital difficulties that seemed to be taking an increasingly severe toll on his patients' mental and physical well-being. These were people who prided themselves on discretion and loyalty, making Evangeline's disappearance all the more puzzling to those who knew the rigid hierarchy and watchful eyes that governed every aspect of life in the mansion. The Vandermark household operated with the precision of a fine timepiece, with every servant knowing their exact duties and schedule down to the minute. This rigid order made it virtually impossible for anyone to enter or leave the mansion unnoticed, a fact that would make Evangeline's mysterious disappearance seem all the more supernatural to those who didn't understand the darker forces at work behind the scenes. The city of Pittsburgh itself seemed to hold its breath during that bitter winter of 1887, as if sensing that the forces of change and violence that had shaped its rapid growth were about to claim another victim. The recent Haymarket riot in Chicago had sent shock waves through America's industrial centers, and Pittsburgh's own labor movements were growing increasingly organized and militant in their demands for safer working conditions and fair wages. Into this volatile atmosphere came whispers of a secret organization of industrialists who had banded together to maintain their power through any means necessary, including the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened their control over America's growing industrial empire. This shadowy cabal, known only in hushed tones as the Circle, operated with an impunity that defied the very notion of justice. They understood that true power lay not in the visible structures of government, but in the unseen levers of control, the manipulation of markets, and the quiet eradication of dissent. Evangeline, in her relentless pursuit of truth, had stumbled upon the existence of this very circle, realizing with chilling clarity that her husband was not merely a member, but a key architect of its most brutal operations. She had moved from a wife seeking answers to a woman facing down an enemy far more vast and sinister than she could have ever imagined. The precise, almost sterile order of the Vandermark mansion, once a symbol of opulence, now felt like a cage. Every locked door, every sealed window, every loyal servant was part of a system designed to maintain an illusion of normalcy, to suppress any ripple of dissent, and to ensure that the dark underbelly of Cornelius Vandermark's empire remained forever concealed. She was trapped, and she knew it. The events of December 12, 1887 began like any other winter evening in the Vandermark household, with the precise routine that had governed daily life in the mansion for over 5 years. Margaret Sullivan would later testify to police that she had served dinner to Mr. and Mrs. Vandermark in the formal dining room at precisely 7 o'clock, as was their custom. The dining room itself was a masterpiece of Victorian excess, featuring a massive mahogany table that could seat 24 guests, illuminated by a crystal chandelier imported from Bohemia and surrounded by oil paintings depicting scenes of industrial triumph that Cornelius had commissioned from prominent American artists. The meal that evening consisted of roasted pheasant, winter vegetables from the estate's greenhouse, and a bottle of French wine from Cornelius's private cellar, an 1878 Chateau Margaux that had cost more than most Pittsburgh workers earned in a month. Margaret noted that Evangeline seemed unusually quiet during the meal, barely touching her food and responding to her husband's conversation with only brief nods and murmurs. But what struck the housekeeper as most unusual was the way Evangeline kept glancing toward the dining room windows, as if expecting to see someone approaching through the snow-covered grounds. She had the look of a woman who knew something terrible was coming. Margaret would later tell Detective Samuel Crawford, her thick Irish accent heavy with emotion, like she was trying to memorize every detail of the room, as if she knew it might be the last time she'd see it. Cornelius, for his part, appeared to be in unusually high spirits that evening, speaking animatedly about a new steel contract he had secured with the Pennsylvania Railroad and his plans for expanding operations into Ohio and West Virginia. But Charles Henley, serving the meal with his characteristic silent efficiency, noticed that despite his cheerful demeanor, Cornelius kept checking his pocket watch throughout dinner, behavior that suggested he was expecting some predetermined event to occur at a specific time. At 9:30, Margaret had helped Evangeline prepare for bed, assisting her into the emerald silk evening gown that she often wore when entertaining at home, though no guests were expected that evening. This detail would later puzzle investigators, as Evangeline typically wore simpler nightclothes when retiring, and the elaborate evening gown seemed entirely inappropriate for a quiet night at home. The gown itself was a stunning creation imported from Paris at a cost of nearly $500, with intricate beadwork that caught the light from the gas lamps and created an almost ethereal effect as Evangeline moved. Margaret specifically remembered complimenting the gown's intricate beadwork, and Evangeline had smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness the housekeeper had seen from her mistress in weeks. But along with that smile came something else that would haunt Margaret for the rest of her life. Evangeline had embraced her, holding her tightly for several long seconds while whispering, "Thank you for your kindness, Margaret. You've been like a mother to me these past years." At the time, Margaret had been touched by the unexpected display of affection, but looking back, she realized it had felt very much like a goodbye. She looked almost relieved, Margaret would later tell the police. Like a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders, if you understand my meaning. But there was something else there, too. A kind of terrible sadness, as if she knew she was about to lose everything she held dear. During the preparation for bed, Margaret also noticed that Evangeline was wearing a piece of jewelry she had never seen before, a small silver locket on a thin chain around her neck. When Margaret commented on it, Evangeline had simply said it contained something precious that must be preserved, but she refused to open it or explain its significance. The locket was ornate in design with intricate Celtic knotwork that suggested Irish craftsmanship, and it seemed strangely out of place among Evangeline's usual collection of expensive but understated jewelry. This wasn't merely jewelry, it was a testament, a final piece of a puzzle she was desperately trying to leave behind. Thomas Brennan, making his final rounds of the estate's perimeter at 11 o'clock, reported seeing a light in Evangeline's private study on the second floor. Through the frost-covered window, he observed her silhouette seated at her writing desk, her pen moving steadily across paper in what appeared to be urgent, almost frantic writing. This was the last confirmed sighting of Evangeline Vandermark alive, though Thomas would later remember thinking at the time that something about her posture suggested desperation rather than the calm correspondence that usually occupied her evening hours. What Thomas couldn't see from his position on the grounds was the scene unfolding inside Evangeline's study. The room was her private sanctuary, decorated with mementos from her childhood in Boston and filled with the books and personal papers that represented her true intellectual interests. That night, Evangeline was engaged in what she knew would be her final act of documentation, writing a detailed account of everything she had discovered about her husband's criminal activities and the systematic murder campaign that had eliminated dozens of his competitors and potential threats. The study itself bore witness to months of careful investigation. Hidden behind seemingly innocent books were photographs, documents, and correspondence that revealed the true scope of the Pittsburgh Circle's activities. Maps of Pennsylvania and neighboring states were marked with red pins indicating the locations of suspicious industrial accidents, each accompanied by detailed notes about the victims, the circumstances of their deaths, and the business advantages that had accrued to Circle members as a result. This wasn't just a journal, it was a meticulously compiled ledger of corruption, a damning indictment of the elite who deemed themselves above the law. She was leaving behind a legacy of truth, a weapon against the darkness. At 6 o'clock in the morning, when Margaret arrived to begin her daily duties, she discovered the front door locked from the inside, with the heavy iron bolt that could only be engaged from within the house securely in place. The mansion's 12 windows on the ground floor were all latched shut, their locks showing no signs of tampering. Margaret tested each one personally, as she had been trained to do during her years of service, and found them all secure with no indication that anyone had attempted to force them open from the outside. The second and third floor windows were too high to access without a ladder, and Thomas confirmed that all ladders remained in the carriage house, undisturbed, and covered with a thin layer of snow that had fallen during the night. The snow itself told its own story, a perfect blanket of white that showed no footprints or other signs of disturbance around the mansion's perimeter. If someone had left the house during the night, they had done so without touching the ground. But it was the discovery in the foyer that stopped Margaret's heart and sent Charles Henley running to fetch Thomas from the grounds. There, arranged with almost ceremonial precision, on the imported Persian rug, lay Evangeline's emerald gown. The fabric was still warm when Margaret touched it, as if Evangeline had only just removed it, and the scent of her signature lavender perfume hung in the cold morning air like the ghost of her presence. The gown appeared to have been removed with great care, lying flat and perfectly arranged, as if it were being displayed for viewing. No buttons were torn, no seams were damaged, and the delicate beadwork remained intact. Beside the gown lay a single piece of paper, a page torn from Evangeline's private journal with only 4 words written in her distinctive handwriting: "The truth must survive." But there were other, more disturbing details that the servants noticed in those first terrifying moments of discovery. The Persian rug beneath the gown showed slight discoloration, as if it had been recently cleaned or treated with some kind of chemical solution. The air in the foyer carried not just the scent of lavender perfume, but also a faint odor that Thomas later described as medicinal, like the stuff they use in hospitals to put people to sleep. Most puzzling of all was the condition of Evangeline's jewelry. Her wedding ring, a massive diamond surrounded by emeralds that was worth more than most people's homes, lay on the marble floor beside the gown. But the small silver locket she had been wearing the night before, the one Evangeline had said must be preserved, was gone. It was not merely missing, it was conspicuously absent, a silent scream in the face of the carefully staged scene. This was no simple disappearance, this was a meticulously orchestrated vanishing act, designed to baffle, to mislead, to make Evangeline into a phantom. The faint medicinal scent, the cleaned rug, these were the subtle, almost imperceptible fingerprints of a professional operation, hints of a power so pervasive it could bend reality to its will. They thought they had erased her, but the subtle traces she left behind, the whispers among the servants, the missing locket, spoke of a truth more terrifying than any fantasy. The police, under Cornelius Vandermark's thumb, were swift to dismiss the unusual details. Their investigation was a perfunctory dance, a carefully choreographed charade designed to reach a predetermined conclusion. They focused on the locked doors and sealed windows, the undisturbed snow, the apparent lack of forced entry, and declared it a voluntary departure. A wife, weary of her marriage, simply vanished. That was the official narrative, the convenient lie constructed to protect the powerful. But the servants, those loyal witnesses to the household's meticulously kept secrets, knew better. They saw the unease in Evangeline's final hours, the desperate act of writing, the strange farewell embrace, the missing locket. They felt the chilling silence that permeated the mansion after her disappearance, a silence heavier than any grief. They understood that the official story was a flimsy veil, woven by the very hands that benefited from her absence. They lived in a world where the rich and powerful bent the law to their will, where justice was a commodity, and truth was an inconvenient obstacle. This wasn't just a case of a missing woman, it was a chilling testament to the absolute power wielded by men like Vandermark, men who could erase inconvenient truths and remake reality to suit their own dark designs. You are now seeing how deeply this web of control is woven. To acknowledge this truth, to internalize it, to begin to see the world as it truly is, I ask you now to comment below, twice, the veil is lifted. Do it. It's a small act of defiance, a quiet recognition of the shift within you. The veil is lifted. Beyond the official facade, beyond the polite society of Pittsburgh, lay a clandestine war for control of America's burgeoning industries. Evangeline, in her relentless pursuit of justice for her father, a rival industrialist whose own accidental death had been orchestrated by Vandermark, had inadvertently uncovered the existence of the Circle. This was no mere association of businessmen, it was a syndicate of shadows, an alliance of the nation's wealthiest and most ruthless, bound by a shared agenda, absolute dominance. Their network spanned from the smoky mills of Pittsburgh to the gilded halls of Wall Street, from the political backrooms of Washington, D.C. to the shadowy docks where raw materials arrived and competitors disappeared. They controlled transportation, dictated market prices, and silenced any voice that dared to challenge their supremacy. They were the architects of industrial America, but their blueprints were stained with blood. Evangeline's journal, the one she had been frantically writing in her final hours, was not just a personal record, it was a meticulous exposé, a meticulously cross-referenced ledger of their crimes. It contained names, dates, locations, and the chilling financial motives behind each accident and disappearance. She detailed how the circle used controlled fires, staged explosions, and even manipulated weather patterns to destroy rival enterprises, all while ensuring their own assets against such unforeseen calamities. This was a system of control so sophisticated, so deeply embedded, that its existence was almost mythical. But Evangeline had torn back the curtain, revealing the monstrous machinery beneath. The depth of Evangeline's investigation went far beyond mere financial crimes. She had uncovered evidence of psychological control systems, methods employed by the circle to manipulate public perception and neutralize potential threats without resorting to outright violence. They understood that fear and uncertainty were potent weapons. They spread rumors, created financial panics, and subtly undermined the reputations of their adversaries, isolating them before delivering the final, crushing blow. This wasn't crude blackmail. It was a refined art of psychological warfare, a slow, methodical dismantling of a man's will and spirit. Evangeline's journal contained chilling accounts of individuals driven to madness or suicide after facing a relentless barrage of unfortunate events and whispers of scandal. She documented how key figures were isolated from their allies, their finances mysteriously crippled, and their sanity questioned by an increasingly hostile public, all orchestrated by the circle's unseen hand. This wasn't just about money, it was about absolute power, the power to shape minds, to break spirits, to control the very narrative of reality. Evangeline, a woman of refined sensibilities, was forced to confront the abyss of human depravity, to witness the systematic dehumanization of men and women who dared to stand against the tide. She learned that the greatest chains are not always made of iron. Sometimes, they are forged from fear, doubt, and manipulated perception. The missing locket, that small piece of Celtic knotwork Evangeline wore, became a silent key to the hidden agenda. It was more than jewelry. It was a data cache, a micro-engraved message, a testament to her desperate attempt to leave behind a trace of the truth. Within its intricate design, she had somehow embedded critical information, perhaps a cipher, a location, or even a miniature map to the full extent of her research. This locket was the ultimate act of defiance, a final, cunning move against a husband who believed he controlled every aspect of her life, even her demise. Its absence from the scene of her vanishing was not an oversight, but a deliberate act by the perpetrators to ensure Evangeline's knowledge remained buried. They understood its significance, its power to unravel their carefully constructed web of lies. But Evangeline, with her sharp intellect, had planned for this. She knew the locket was a beacon, a signal to any who truly understood the language of secrets. It whispered of ancient corruption, of institutional manipulation that extended far beyond Pittsburgh's steel mills, hinting at a global network of power that had been silently shaping human history for centuries. This locket was a fragment of a much larger, darker tapestry, a thread leading back to forbidden history, to suppressed truths guarded by those who pull the strings of civilization. The faint medicinal odor in the foyer, dismissed by the police as residual cleaning solution, was anything but benign. It was the signature scent of a potent anesthetic, likely chloroform, administered expertly to ensure Evangeline's silent removal. This wasn't a panicked struggle, it was a professional extraction, executed with chilling precision. This detail revealed the involvement of individuals with specialized skills, perhaps even a medically trained operative, working in concert with the circle. They sought to avoid any struggle, any noise, any evidence of violence that could not be easily explained away. The warmth of the gown, the meticulous arrangement on the rug, these were not signs of a hurried abduction but rather a deliberate performance. It was a message, a warning, a declaration of power. We can make you disappear without a trace, even from within the confines of your own home, and we will leave behind only what serves our narrative. The psychological impact of such a scene is devastating, designed to instill terror not only in the victim but in all who witness the aftermath. It speaks of an invisible hand, an unseen force that moves with impunity, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. This was not a crime of passion, but a clinical operation, a surgical removal of an inconvenient truth. It cemented the reality that Evangeline was up against forces that transcended common criminal acts, forces capable of almost supernatural feats of concealment. The 4 words on the torn journal page, "The truth must survive," were not a plea but a command, a final act of rebellion from a woman who knew her time was short. This single fragment was a deliberate breadcrumb, left for anyone brave enough to follow. It was Evangeline's ultimate weapon, a desperate attempt to ensure that her sacrifice was not in vain. She understood that while her body might vanish, her truth, once exposed, held the power to shatter the very foundations of the Circle's empire. These words were a testament to her unwavering moral compass, her refusal to be silenced, even in the face of overwhelming power. They defied the psychological control systems designed to break her spirit, proving that even in her final moments, she remained unyielding. This was the mark of a true warrior, one who understood that the battle for truth is fought not with fists, but with revelations. Her legacy was not her wealth or her social standing, but her courage to expose the hidden agendas and ancient corruption that permeated society. Her message was not just for the police, who were compromised, but for anyone willing to listen, anyone with the courage to question the narrative spoon-fed to them by those in power. It was a direct challenge to the institutional manipulation that kept humanity blind, the undisturbed snow around the mansion, the locked doors, the sealed windows. These details, so puzzling to the police, were actually a signature of the Circle's advanced capabilities. This was not merely about a locked room, it was about the manipulation of time, space, and perception. They possessed methods of ingress and egress that defied conventional understanding, perhaps utilizing forgotten passages, hidden tunnels, or even advanced, concealed mechanisms within the estate itself. The ice house, previously mentioned, could have been more than a storage facility. It could have been a key component in their chilling plan, a clandestine entry point or an integral part of Evangeline's final journey into the unknown. This was a testament to their foresight, their meticulous planning, their ability to control every variable. The perfect blanket of snow wasn't just a result of the weather, it was a canvas upon which they painted their illusion of a perfect, untampered scene. They wanted to show that nothing had been disturbed, that the mansion remained an impenetrable fortress, thus amplifying the mystery and lending a supernatural air to Evangeline's disappearance. But the truth was far more terrifying than ghosts. It was the chilling efficiency of human power at its most ruthless. They were not merely criminals, they were masters of illusion, engineers of reality, shaping events to maintain their grip on the world. Consider the implication. Evangeline, a woman of intellect and moral fortitude, was not simply a victim of foul play, but a martyr in a war against unseen forces. Her disappearance was not just a tragic event but a strategic move by the Circle to silence the greatest threat to their existence. They had chosen to make an example of her, to send a chilling message to anyone who dared to dig too deep into their secrets. The official closing of the case after 6 days, the immediate dismissal of any suspicious details, was not incompetence but complicity. It showcased the deep infiltration of the Circle into law enforcement and political structures. They controlled the narrative, from the highest levels of government down to the beat cop on the street. This reveals the chilling reality of a society where the rule of law is a facade, a tool for the powerful to maintain their dominance, rather than a shield for the innocent. Evangeline's story is a microcosm of a much larger, global struggle against hidden agendas and ancient corruption, a battle fought in the shadows, where the truth is often the first casualty. Her sacrifice was a stark reminder that some knowledge is considered so dangerous, so transformative, that those who seek it risk everything. The weight of this knowledge, this understanding of the world's true mechanics, is a burden few can carry. Evangeline's final act, her journal entries, the missing locket, these were not merely clues to a single crime, they were a roadmap to the pervasive systems of psychological control and institutional manipulation that still operate today. The very fabric of society is woven with threads of hidden agendas, carefully constructed narratives designed to keep the masses compliant and unaware. You are now seeing the true nature of the power that governs our world, a power that operates beyond the visible, beyond the easily discernible. It manipulates economies, shapes political landscapes, and even influences cultural norms, all from the deep shadows where true power resides. Evangeline's story is a stark reminder that the fight for truth is eternal, and the forces that seek to suppress it are relentless. But in every hidden truth, in every suppressed narrative, lies a seed of awakening. Her disappearance was meant to be a final, terrifying warning, but to those with eyes to see and ears to hear, it becomes an undeniable call to arms. This is not just a tale of the past, it is a mirror reflecting our present reality. The same hidden forces, the same patterns of manipulation, the same ruthless pursuit of power that consumed Evangeline Vandermark are still at play, albeit in more sophisticated, insidious forms. They operate through the media, through educational systems, through political institutions, shaping our thoughts, controlling our narratives, and directing our lives without our conscious awareness. Evangeline's sacrifice demands more than just curiosity, it demands action. It demands a commitment to seeing beyond the veil, to questioning every comfortable truth, to seeking the knowledge that frees you from their control. Her legacy is a burning torch, passed down through time, illuminating the path for those brave enough to walk it. This knowledge, once absorbed, changes you. It strips away illusions, sharpens your perceptions, and awakens a primal understanding of the true nature of power. The choice is yours: remain comfortably oblivious, a pawn in their game, or embrace the dangerous truth, and begin to forge your own path toward self-mastery. The veil has been lifted. Now, what will you do with what you've seen?